Hello, and welcome to Khyber Shards, a 5th edition actual play show set in the Eberron campaign world. It's Friday, so we've got another Khyber Shards Answers, and obviously we are joined today by R.A., player of Esri. So our most recent events saw some more exploration of Esri's not so aberrant dragon mark. And we have quite a lot of questions, or we got our questions mostly revolve around that. So I want to dive straight into that. Our first question is from Mia. Mia says, Esri's overall attitude seems to have softened since the vampire interaction. That's a nice gentle term for what went down. Since the vampire interaction.
Since he met a vampire.
Mm-hmm. Are you able to talk about that without spoilers? I'd love to hear more about that adjustment, especially with respect to your interactions with Jalert.
Interesting. So, I don't know. I'll say I don't think I've. Man, it really depends on how you interpret soften. There, I mean, presumably from the aspect of. I guess how things are going with the rest of the group, if that the interpersonal stuff there, perhaps. I don't think I've made a conscious choice necessarily, other than at least not specifically around the vampire. When there was a while ago, he sort of made the decision that, okay, resisting this means leaving them, and so I'm not doing that apparently. So I guess I'm in, and so he's no longer trying to pull everyone away from this edge. We've leaped over it, and since we've leaped over it, there's nothing to be gained by trying to convince people not to do these things. So he's trying to work out how to influence the group around him, while supporting all of the nonsense that's going on. He doesn't have that down yet, obviously. Still trying to figure out where he really fits into the group. I mean, he's doing a lot of patching up and preventing death. He'd like to be more. He'd like to get to where we're not having to prevent death so often, even if we are in dangerous situations. Regarding Jalert, he needs information. He needs to know what. Jalert seems to be the only one who has the information for him. Anyone else who has it, he assumes, is like Jalert and is in, some is not available to him. He's not a library goer. He doesn't know how to do research on his own. I mean, he's not unintelligent, and he can read and such, but that's not how he gets information. He gets information by talking to people, by listening, by paying attention. Anyway, and so this is the only avenue he thinks he has to figure out what's going on. And so while he doesn't really like Jalert's point of view, maybe his attitude towards certain things, Esri also absolutely, as long as it doesn't really involve sweet talking people, he knows how to get what he wants. He understands exchange, and he understands that he's got quite a lot of advantages over Jalert, and so he knows how to use those. Threatening obviously was not light threatening. I mean, I don't think he ever really threatened him, but he probed to see how does he respond to threats. And it's not going to go well. All right, now I have a resource in this house. I've got this library here, so I can make use of that, and we can both get what we want.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it's his attitude towards Jolaire has not changed. Really, it's just a matter of practicality, getting what he wants.
Yeah.
And he was never like, he never felt very strongly one way or the other. It's not, it just didn't behoove him to be polite before. Like he didn't care about being polite before. And so, yeah, he didn't need to.
I'm curious, what is that? How does that connect to Thora in the relationship that the group is developing with her?
Thora is completely different. He's expressed this. He thinks everyone's convinced that it's the right thing to do. Obviously, in the moment, it's incredibly advantageous. It seems obviously the safe, other than running and hiding, the safest place they could possibly be. And she has a lot of goodwill built up from the past. So, well, from the past and the recent past. So he does. It's fine for now, but he's expressed that she's above their grade. She could be absolutely playing us, and we wouldn't know. He has noticed. Did this play? Yeah. He got away with a lie, or at least a half truth, with her, in recounting the events with the vampire. So he's noted that she's not. Either she noticed and she didn't mention it, and press it, or she's not looking for it as closely as he might have expected her to. But he's without spoilers, he's heavily cautious about Thora. He's not, this is they've put themselves back in someone else's power. Whether, I mean, obviously to some extent they didn't have a choice. That power was granted to her by others, but they could have left that situation, I think. Anyway, I don't know if that fully answers where you were going with that, but it's Esri has not lost his practicality. Yeah, he is intentionally shifted how he feels or how he's approaching certain situations. But yeah, Thor is the big unknown and worry right now. Even if she's, at least she's providing good stuff, but he's ready for that to go bad.
Fair enough. Our next question comes from Eric. What are Esri's thoughts on the relationship between the decay of plants and people's bodies after death? I guess this is a question of how does, considering his interest in, or his mark's connection to it, what are Esri's views on death and decay? Does his mark affect that?
Sure. That's probably it's a big topic.
Yeah.
So specifically
how
decay,
do you feel about death. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so his thoughts about death overall are evolving rapidly. There's a lot he didn't know that he's learning, and his connection to spiritual death, or at least the spiritual side of death, is evolving rapidly. That's new. His relationship with physical death he's had for a long time. He doesn't, the realities of death to him, of physical death to him, are not mysterious or taboo in any way. That's the matter with which that's how he connects to the world most. That's what his mark gives him a connection to most directly. It's evolving to like the spiritual side, and that's new and unknown. and weird and exciting to him. So if the thrust of the question, well, yeah, I'm curious about the thrust of the question. Just he sees everything on a gradient. Everything is just on a gradient of life to death. Nothing is. Everything is alive. Everything that's alive is moving towards death, and everything that's dead is potentially part of something that will be alive again. And so, yeah, in that spectrum, I'm trying to think of the encounters he has. He doesn't have any spiritual respect for instance, the remains of people.
Right.
It's always difficult to say because they're not all humans.
Yeah.
But of sentience, it's like, well, it's the same matter it was before, but they're not using it, and now I can use it.
Right.
So that's not mysterious. Or
one man's corpse is another man's
sacred. Yeah, he doesn't have a religious connection in any of that stuff. So he's very pragmatic about it.
Mm-hmm. And Eric also asks, does Esri have any reservations about the use of his mark? Presumably now that he sees that he can animate things with it and that sort of thing.
He's very concerned. He doesn't quite know what the vampire interaction was concerning.
Mm.
He doesn't know quite what that makes him. I guess he's sort of edging a little bit towards Shade's concern about, okay, what does our mark actually do to us? He doesn't want to be evil. He's not necessarily inherently, I mean, he's neutral if we're using
sure.
the classic, but he's neutral to the side of good. It's, he's not necessarily going out of his way to be a good person, but he certainly doesn't want to be, the cause for the cause for anyone's undue pain. I mean, that's where his ethos lies. Like, he has no trouble. He doesn't really have any problem causing pain. He doesn't want it to be undue. Yeah,
right.
Like, there's got to be some reason for it. And so in that sense, the necromancy is overt necromancy, I suppose, is pretty. There's a stigma. Even in that world,
sure.
it seems like there's a stigma around it. It's not necessarily banned, but if you're going around animating corpses, people wonder why you're doing it. And
sure.
And of course you need the corpses. I think that's really where necromancy goes wrong, right? It's not so much animating the corpses, it's, well, I need the corpses, so you have to make them.
Mm-hmm.
That's really where the evil necromancy is.
Right.
At least in his mind, right? Like, again, it's a body. You don't need this body anymore. You're dead.
Right.
So fine. But if I kill you in order to use your body, that's pretty distinctly evil.
Right. I acquire your body from you.
Well, yeah, for the purposes of this. Like, I need a body. I'm just going to get one. Excuse me. So remind me of the question again. Am I concerned? Is he concerned about his mark?
Does he have reservations about using his mark?
He doesn't have reservations about using his mark, generally speaking, because that's really his only identity, is the abilities that his mark gives him. That's what he does. Even at the base level, when he's, his like base level profession is a forager and a alchemist, botanist, I don't know, naturalist, is that right? Naturist. I don't know what the word is. somewhere in there. And all of that is because his mark gives him this this intuitive magical connection to all that stuff.
Right.
I mean, he's in no way is he looking to be unmarked at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, there's probably a part of him that's like, well, it would have been better had I not had this, but at this point, that's his identity. So he's not at all shying away from making use of it. He does have, he's always had reservations about using it visibly, that this is new. The fact that we're supposed to be doing it. He's very aware it's going to bring trouble. It's going to be a problem, but that's a problem that we've now signed up for. So yeah,
Cool.
I think that covers all the angles.
I think so. And then Laura has a question. They ask, if Esri got to name the team, because of course any aberrant team needs a name, what would Esri name the team?
The Fighting Orlandos. What would he actually name? I mean, I wanted to call the island Orlando, because it's such a weird name. That's such a unique, odd name in the fantasy world. His, Grimalkin is so passé.
Orlando.
Everyone knows a Grimalkin.
Yeah, right.
I mean, everyone's got an Aunt Grimalkin. What would he name the team? That's tough. I don't know if that's not really his forte. I mean, he's not into House Tarkanan.
Mm-hmm.
If that's what, well, is that what we mean by team? Because that's like the group entire, but our team is not the whole. It's not all House Tarkanan. We kind of need, because the X-Men had team blue and yellow, right? They had
blue and gold
color teams.
Yeah,
gold.
Mm-hmm. And then of course there's the Avengers, and then the West Coast Avengers.
Yeah,
Marvel seems determined to forget ever happened.
I don't know, because man, naming it all is just so anti everything that he'd want to do. That why would we name ourselves? The only reason to name yourself is to give people the name so they know who you are, which is not what he's about.
Contrary to what you would want to do.
Yeah, I think he thinks it's a bit uncouth. The House Tarkanan thing's a bit uncouth. Really, House at all is a little uncouth for them. Something to do with aberrant mark, but not aberrant, like the marked, or the people's. I don't know. I'd have to think about that. That's tough.
We really need to develop something that people with aberrant marks would be likely to call themselves, because the term aberrant obviously implies something negative about your mark, and so it seems. I guess as a way of like taking it back, but it seems unlikely that you would have a group of people who would go around calling themselves aberrant. Interesting.
The historical pattern would be to probably like take some form of it. Yeah. Right? Like the Abers or something, just like, so it's the word, but you've modified it enough that it doesn't have its root meaning. Right. And then you can use it and take it back. I mean, for him, the idea is, okay, all the other marks are standardized, right? They all do the same thing. Our thing is that we don't do the same thing. That's only aberrant by the definition of those in power. It's only aberrant from what you've what's the term when you
normalized,
you've bred something to be, you've bred traits out.
Domesticated.
Well, I mean that's like the good animal term, but like the bad term, eugenics. You've eugenicized, I'm not sure if that's the right form, but your way to having these marks but we're back to how things should be. So
Right.
something along those lines, the true marks, or but
Yeah.
the true house. I don't know.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. We'll have to workshop that some. Because I think that's
Except that,
interesting.
of course, Esri is also not apparently that. So
Right.
I don't know. He's existing in a very like weird middle state of everything right now.
Yeah.
A lot of going along to get along.
And then Laura also asks, what kind of shenanigans would Esri get up to if he had Ari's forgetting curse?
Shenanigans. I don't know. I mean, depending on how you again mean that word, what would he be doing? He probably would never have gone to the program to begin with. It seems to me like he would make really great. He would have made use of that as on the streets of Sharn. He would have the fact that if he realized he could get away, what he could get away with using that, I think he would be a much worse person than he is, and also a much more well-off, powerful person. So I mean, some sort of criminal. I mean, I guess it's sort of like I'm trying to think through, but it's kind of like Batman, the bad Batman almost. You know, sneaking around. No one knows who he is, and bad things keep or at least it's hard to say. But I think given the situation he was in, he would have used it to get ahead.
Yeah.
And that wouldn't have taken a great form. So
Can be our what if episode.
yeah. I mean, that's a villainous path for him.
Yeah.
For sure.
That's interesting. Well, okay.
Not at this point. I think he's past that now, but
yeah.
But it definitely could have gone that way.
Speaking of that, what is because Shade has very, very vocally shifted priorities ever since you guys met Thora, or I guess more since you guys had to sit in that room with the Stormlords. To obviously the solution to everything is that we need power. Being as pragmatic as he is that Esri as well? As the solution to this is that we get power now that anonymity seems to be off the table.
Yeah, I think to some extent. I mean, I think we've talked about this some as well, but like he understands very strongly the problem with power is that you need enough of it to keep you safe. Like you're gonna go through this valley of notoriety without security, and you have to survive that. You get on the other side of that, sure, you can build up your power, and you can use that as a means for survival. But they've tipped over that edge now, and it's the thing he was afraid of, is that, well, they've always had power. That's the whole problem. That's what makes them scary to the rest of society, is they have power that's not normalized and controlled. And so hiding that power is the means of survival. So now, yeah, we've tipped it over, and there's going to be repercussions for that. Especially since we're so bad at it. We've already made enemies accidentally. Just by being jokers, who don't have training in this. You know, we're not we weren't raised in courts and to know how to navigate these things. So yeah. He's not necessarily on team get powerful, but I think going back to what I said before, he's trying to figure out how he he contributes to these things that the rest of the group wants to do, and how he uses the fact that, at least from his point of view, he sees threats better than everyone else. He has he feels like, at least, he has a better understanding of where the threats are going to come from, so he's going to try to use that for their betterment. He's not the ambitious one here, at least not in those realms.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well,
I guess that's.
Oh, yeah.
I guess that is a question I have. You're using a system, you're using a mechanical way of basically tracking such things. But I don't. How does? I guess I'm curious what that looks like later game. You know, how do you wield political power in an RPG? You know, because you're not dungeon crawling with it.
Right. So the way that, the rule set that I landed on as far as faction power, because there's lots and lots of them, and you can go really, really granular with it, with different systems. The one I went with is relatively not granular, because I felt like that enough of our group would not be super delighted to dive into a really granular system. I know that you and I are usually a little more on the crunchy side of rules and enjoy that kind of thing, but I think that's not the whole group's cup of tea. So what I landed on was Blades in the Dark, which is an entirely different RPG system, which, I'll be honest, I haven't played it, so I want to give it the benefit of the doubt there. Reading it doesn't make me want necessarily to run that game, but reading it makes me look at the concepts and say, oh, I can see how this would make me better at GMing other things. Obviously, without spoiling, something we just recorded last night, I used a whole bunch of Blades in the Dark concepts to help set up a mission, with preparatory rolls and that kind of things, giving you guys resources. That's a very Blades in the Dark idea. But in terms of factions, the way that Blades in the Dark works is factions have a tier, and your faction, it's the kind of gang you are, and I'm basing this off of a sub-rule set called Vigilantes, which lets you be Blades in the Dark, but you're kind of on the side of the angels as opposed to being a bunch of cutthroats. And so you determine what kind of gang you are. And so the vigilante gang that you guys obviously leaned towards is one that they refer to as gargoyles, which is you are the Batman, Spider-Man. Something just bounced right off my window. I don't know what it was, and it startled the heck out of me.
Gotta be a bird.
Remarkably not my dogs, though. They just took it in stride. Sorry. Sure. Anyway, the Spider-Man, Batman Defenders kind of gang, where you have a neighborhood that you are taking under your care. Yeah. And that will determine what kind of missions you get the most rep from, which is like faction experience. And so the main kind of missions that your style would incline towards in a Blades in the Dark game is what they call takedown missions, where you go and hurt a criminal enterprise in some way, or I can't remember what their specific term for this is, but like rallying or something like that, where you are forming the community together or improving the lives of the community in some way. That these are the two kinds of jobs that are best for you. And so the way that it runs a game is a job you do, and it's set up to be very episodic. A job you do will provide you a certain amount of rep. You get some rep just for accomplishing it. You get more rep if it's the kind of job that your gang is inclined towards, and you get more rep if you are targeting a gang of a higher tier than you, because it's usually harder to do. So what I'm doing, and then I guess the other mechanic is turf, which is where as you push gangs as you take stuff from other gangs. Some missions you can go and try and take turf from another gang, and turf usually gives you some benefits determining the kind of turf, and also on the gang sheet in Blades of the Dark, the rep track has a turf track going in the opposite direction, and so the more turf you have, the less rep you need to level up.
Okay.
So I took that idea and adapted a lot of the upgrades and benefits, which you guys picked having an intelligence expert as your first upgrade. That was a choice I gave you guys, and that's where Natalia came from. But the rest of it doesn't really fit because the dice mechanic in Blades in the Dark is entirely different from a D20 system. So what I've done is I've attached a die size to each tier. So right now you're a tier 1 gang, and that comes with a D4. So if you guys were to go do something public on behalf of the organization, on behalf of House Tarkanan, I would let you roll that D4 on top of your skill check. Or if you were to form a secondary team at some point down the road, if you were to become A team and were to form a B team, and you wanted to send them out to take care of something somewhere, the way that they would roll is we'd roll a D20 and also your tier die, whatever that is. And that would be how we determine that. So they don't need stats. We can determine their success just by rolling. And depending on the type of gang they are, they might have advantage or something like that on it. There's some other little levers to pull, but it basically works as the modifier for anything that the organization does at it as a whole. And there are ways that you could have advantage on it. Like if a player is specifically leading the action, then there would be advantage on the roll, or add your proficiency to the roll or something like that. And so the higher tier you go, the bigger the die becomes. So when you get to tier 2, it's a D6 and a D8 and so forth.
Sure.
And every time you level up, you get to add some upgrades to the lair that benefit the house or the organization. And every time you take more turf, there are benefits as well. And for vigilantes, turf is a little bit different because you're not generally, like if we were playing just criminals and you went and drove a rival gang out of a business that they were using as a front, like you went and took over that shop that the Stormhammers were using as a front for their meetings. Well, now you'd have that shop as a front, but obviously that's not the kind of organization that you are. And so it would be more like now that shop is under your protection, and the shopkeeper appreciates it. Like they like you. And so maybe you would acquire discounted goods from them or something like that. You'd come up with an equivalent benefit for that. In terms of late game stuff where you're like interacting, if you guys were to get into, politicking and negotiating, most of the way that this mechanic would play out is you would gain benefits on a roll to accomplish something based on the tier that you are by getting to roll that extra die. And also, if you have experts or other assets as an organization that would apply to this situation, I would let you add whatever benefit comes with that expert or that thing. So if you guys were negotiating with a Stormlord, you could first task Natalia with acquiring some sort of leverage that you could use in the negotiation. And so we would make a roll to see if Natalia is successful in that, and then that would give you advantage in your negotiation roll or something like that.
Okay.
So that's roughly how it is.
Sideways here. Another just curiosity. The vampire encounter was the most, at least from to what I'm remembering, most freeform encounter we've had so far. Like we had a lot of a say about how and where that went down. Was it surprising to you how we approached it, or was there anything sideways about that?
I was surprised the decision to set up an ambush didn't like the chain across the river, like the actual like guaranteeing that you've got it to stop. I really expected there to be either we're going to try and ambush it at the drop point, or we're going to like jump off the bridge onto it and have the fight on the boat. Like those were the kind of two scenarios that I picked up in my head. What you did had many advantages over both of those, because you got rid of the instability of the scenario of fighting on a boat,
Right.
especially a fairly small craft that is going to have a high probability of people falling in the river. And then, of course, you also isolated the encounter by not waiting for the crew to get to its destination, so you didn't have to also deal with the Emerald Claw.
Yeah, I think that was the biggest motivator for in our mind, was like, yeah, we let this get into civilization. We're four people.
Yeah,
we don't know what we're facing.
And then beyond that, I was caught off guard by Ari trying to mind meld with the vampire. And initially trying to mind meld with the ghoul, because he tried to do that first, I think. And neither of those things occurred to me. It often surprises me, and it probably shouldn't at this point, but it often catches me off guard, the extent to which players will try to talk to something before fighting, even something that, to my mind, is obviously not something you can negotiate with. Like the idea that Ari, and I don't know that this was Eric's intention, but the idea that Ari might be able to reach into the mind of this ghoul and negotiate with it, or calm it, or something like that would just, as a player, never occur to me. This is a ghoul, it's going to try to eat me, I'm killing it. Like that would be my instinct. I'm not saying that's the right way to think about it, but that's the way I am inclined to. And so I'm often taken off guard. Like some things make a lot of sense. You come across a band of goblins or kobolds or something like that, and you're not a sociopath, so you maybe want to find out what's going on before you go in and start chopping heads off. But with things that are undead, with things that are mindless, I tend to just assume we're going in swords drawn. So
yeah, I think
that kind of thing
that's an interesting aspect of these characters being so damaged. There's like, I think there's this character instinct, and all of us maybe in different situations, to like, okay, is this really an evil thing?
Right. Yeah.
Right. Like, do we actually know what's going on here? I mean, that was Esri's take on the specter. What, I don't recall what the actual creature name was. In the library,
Alep is what it was, but yeah,
Alep. He thought, well, we don't necessarily know that this thing is evil or trying to hurt us. We can give it a chance. It's weird. We're weird. Let's see. Maybe it could be a friend, but yeah, it's not usually the case.
Right.
And I think that'll be experience too, right? Like, okay, next time we see a vampire or a ghoul, I don't think there's any like hesitation there. It's like, okay, I know what this is now. I tried once and that didn't go well.
Right. Well,
it's
interesting.
Sorry.
And it is interesting because of the nature of undead, is that there are, and as your conversation with Jalair expressed, there are intelligent undead. And this is not spoilers because this is in the literally opposite side of the civilized world of Eberron. In some parts in the nation of Karnath, there's a very high-ranking priest in the dominant religion there who's a mummy. He doesn't murder people. Like, he doesn't go around terrorizing the town. He's an intelligent, sentient undead. And he's been preserved beyond life for the benefit of his wisdom. And so,
well, yeah, that's the thing about mummies, right? They don't have any of those. They don't have any of those like evil urges. built
Yeah,
in.
they don't have
they?
to eat. They don't have to destroy. They don't have to destroy life to stay alive.
So yeah,
mummies
so
and
I guess
mummies
that's how
and
you want to be
liches
if you're gonna.
could theoretically decide to be decent. Within some elements of the lore, I think it would probably be challenging due to the nature of what you have to do to become those things. But yeah, there's not there. That's the thing about Eberron, is that many things that you would encounter in a dungeon in Forgotten Realms that you could know for a fact that thing's definitely evil and I should kill it. In Eberron, it is a little more complicated than that, which is, I think, one of the things that people like about Eberron.
Was the vampire's attitude towards Esri something known, like something you knew was going to happen going in, or was that a moment sort of thing?
I knew I wanted to represent that Esri's mark gave him some affinity with the undead, and I hadn't really we'd gotten to hint at it, but I hadn't really gotten to represent it in a mechanical sense very much. And so I wanted to make it so that the ghouls would hesitate to attack him. And when Esri didn't immediately engage in that sense, I thought, okay, what else could happen here that would be interesting? And also, there's some narrative that I would like to communicate, and
right.
It seemed like that was an interesting way to go about it, is to have the vampire. Essentially, I have never tracked NPC attitude levels, even though those are in the Dungeon Master Guide. But basically, the vampire did not start out hostile to Esri, and saw Esri as at least potentially an ally, and Esri took that and ran with it, and so that's why I leaned into it. But it was, it was kind of a let's. We're around undead, so let's explore a little more about Esri's connection to them, in the same way that if we're around Fae, we're going to explore a little more of what's going on with Shade and Ari.
It was a very interesting moment as a player and as in the character, making the decision that, okay, something's happening here. I can get information that we're clearly not going to get any other way. But also the only way to get that information is to hope my friends trust me enough that when I'm clearly not helping, what they're going through, that they're gonna let me get away with that. I think that's probably the biggest problem our group has, is that we don't really exercise a lot of in the moment trust. So it was fun to play. I'm glad it worked out the way it did. It was very interesting.
I'm glad it was. Well, and it's really funny to me that does seem to happen quite often, especially considering that you have two telepathic characters, who could communicate these things to each other in silence. And it's just that I totally buy that Esri and Ari wouldn't think to do that. That there's just there's a fundamental still figuring out, how do we now act as a unit? You've worked out how we get along with each other, how we maintain the group, but how do we get the group to act in a way that is cohesive in a crisis? Sure.
Well, there's also just some weirdness around Ari and Esri could. That form of communication is not something that the group has worked out a way to be efficient in. Right? It's only the two of them. They can grant that ability to others, and so it's something to work on. They could be okay, if I tell you this, you tell that. There's a process for who gets told what, but also there's just some. You'd have to practice it, because Shade answers out loud when you speak to her telepathically, and it's been a problem multiple times. So it's well, if I tell Shade, I'm talking to this vampire. It looks like I'm doing, you know, she'll be like, what do you mean you're talking to the vampire? Okay. So it's just, it's better like, okay, maybe she just won't notice I'm not helping. I mean, trust. I mean, she'll trust me when I'm not helping. Yeah.
Right.
No, that was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, good. I'm glad it was. Well, all right. I think that will wrap us up. Thank you so much to our viewers for the questions. Let us have these fun conversations, and thank you, RA, for having time. We'll probably not have a proper KSA next week because it would come out the day after Thanksgiving, and I don't have. People are going to be with family, you know, they got a thing. So we probably won't have. So if you're not from the United States, we have a holiday next week, and next week you may not know. So there probably won't be a standard KSA next Friday, but after that, we'll get back onto the schedule. As I warned last time, we'll probably be a little bit different in format in some cases over the next month or so, because people will be traveling, we'll be doing holidays and that kind of thing. So you may see several that are just solo, or we may miss a couple of weeks, but we assume and rely on your forgiveness for any faultiness to the schedule.
We insist upon it.
We hope you are enjoying. If you are, you can help us out by hitting any of those engagement buttons or giving us a comment down below. If you'd like to get in touch with us.
To us.
Yes. Wait. Yeah. You can also find links to all of our social media in the description, including to our Discord, which is probably by far our most active community conversation, and where we tend to get questions for our KSH. But that will wrap us up. This has been Khyber Shards. Thanks for rolling with us.